The Watership Down Podcast is intended for listeners who are familiar with the plot. There definitely will be spoilers. This episode is scripted, narrated, recorded and edited by Newell Fisher. Hello, and welcome to the Watership Down Podcast, episode 198, which coincides with the third anniversary of the Watership Down Podcast Honeycomb group on Facebook, in which we will be looking at the character of Bigwig as portrayed in the original novel. In episode 199, we will then look at his portrayal from the 1978 film onward. But first, I need to make clear the basis of my analysis of the three most significant characters in Watership Down. Bigwig, Fiver and Hazel, and the Indo-European trifunctional hypothesis. In 1929, the French mythographer Georges Dumezal proposed the idea that in Proto-Indo-European societies there existed three classes or castes: warriors, priests and commoners, or, put another way, the martial, spiritual and economic classes. Whether or not he was correct, this idea of three classes seems to be reflected in some mythologies and in legends such as the tales of King Arthur. To take that example, Sir Lancelot is an example of the warrior class, as he is the best fighter, and Merlin represents the priestly class, with his main preoccupation being things beyond the apparent world. But it is that last class, the commoners, that, while seeming the most boring, is where Arthur, the leader, is drawn from, having had an ordinary upbringing in hiding. So, using this model, might we agree that Bigwig is of the warrior class, and that Fiver, while his talents are not appreciated at Sandalford, ends up being a respected, what? Priest? Seer? Shaman? And that Hazel, initially just as much a member of the rank and file as Hawkbit, Speedwell and Acorn, rises from that rank when the time is right to become a truly great Ra. In rabbit society there is of course no need for an economic class of merchants, which is why their equivalent class has such a rough time of it at warrens such as Sandalford or Efrafa. They have no real useful function beyond breeding and digging. And that dissatisfaction, as well as Fiver's terrible vision, is exactly what motivates many of those who leave Sandalford, with some Owsla also joining. It is in the spirit of this trifunctional hypothesis that I will be looking at the three most significant members of the party of 11 rabbits who left Sandalford. And we will begin with the warrior. Bigwig, the warrior champion. We first meet Bigwig, whose Lapine name is Thlaeli, meaning furhead, when Hazel and Fiver ask to meet the Threarra after Fiver's terrifying vision of the field covered in blood. He is so named due to the growth of longer fur on the crown of his head. At this point in the story, he seems to be just another member of the fairly authoritarian Sandalford Owsla. He expects to get into trouble with the Threarra for persuading him to see the two outskirters, or to have his head bitten off, as he calls it. However, the way he is treated by the Threarra seems to help him come to a decision that he must surely already have been thinking about. He tells his chief rabbit that the privileges of the Owsla aren't that important to him, and describes Owsla life as consisting largely of stealing lettuces and doing sentry duty. In his response to the Threarra, he mentions leaving the warren, and it is him who first bluntly asks Hazel if he is leaving, when he meets him with the others afterwards. Hazel's immediate concern is that Bigwig will try to take over if he comes along, as he clearly did not expect any Owsla to join them. Bigwig says he has been convinced by Fiver's vision, but has his own reasons for leaving with the group. He also says there may be other Owsla who want to join them. In doing so, he seems to refer to himself as having been a junior member of it. Bigwig persuades Owsla member Silver to come along, and Owsla prospect Buckthorn also joins them. These three rabbits, you might argue, are the putative Owsla of the group who leave, simply due to their size, with Bigwig already the senior member. The Sandalford Owsler is only concerned with the Owsler members leaving, though mention is made of a plot against the Threarrah, and Captain Holly turns up with 2 Owsler to arrest just Bigwig and Silver. As soon as Holly mentions the charges against him and Silver, Bigwig does not hesitate to attack him. And so, having first bluntly asked Hazel if he is leaving, it is Bigwig who burns their bridges by viciously attacking the head of the Owsler. It seems this was not done in temper. It was simply a moment in which he judged that violence was the best option at that point. But if they stay now, they will be killed. Once in the woods, Bigwig recommends they all rest to Hazel. Already he is acting like a second in command, otherwise he would have just announced they are stopping. Bigwig seems to appreciate the story of the blessing of El-Akhirah that Dandelion tells as they rest, but as soon as it is finished, he leads them all away from the Lendry or Badger, and they find themselves at the River Enbourne. This reminds us that the primary job of a warrior is not the taking of life, but its preservation in the moment when there is no time to plan. In fact, Bigwig's longer-term planning is almost non-existent until he is told what he should do. Bigwig is a supreme practitioner of this art of improvisation in the moment. After all, it can be better to act quickly than to balance the best option when there is no time to think. However, once trapped by the river and with no idea of what to do next, his temper begins to rise and he questions Hazel's judgment. Hazel realises that this could start to become a problem. And then the exhausted Fiver says they have to cross the river. Blackberry's suggestion that Bigwig swim the river to get a clearer view of the wood gives him a way forward, but it also results in his spotting the dog. Having laid out clearly the danger they face, he directly insults Hazel for the first time when he insists he will stay with Fiver and Pipkin. With no clear way forward for the whole group, Bigwig switches instinctively to every rabbit for himself mode and is prepared to abandon the smaller rabbits. However, as soon as the solution is found, Bigwig is fully on board, so to speak, and is the rabbit who pushes Fiver and Pipkin across the Enbourne on the piece of wood. He ends up cold and exhausted, but doesn't seem to mind that, as long as there is a way forward. Once presented with a clear plan, Bigwig embraces it, but he will rarely come up with one beyond the obvious at this point in the story. Later, in Ephrafa, his capacity to do so will be severely tested. Once Hazel has found the relative shelter of the beanfield, Bigwig leads the way with Silver, getting the whole group to it. When the crow attacks Fiver and Pipkin, Bigwig is the first rabbit to make direct contact with the crow rather than just distract it. He then orders the others to do the same, knowing it will give up once faced with danger, but he has already done enough. Having dealt with this, Bigwig demonstrates his warrior spirit as he recites the Owsle lampoon about meeting the stinking 1,000 even as they stop to pass their droppings. Hoi, hoi, u emble chler, Messian ule chracaver. He then shows kindness to poor injured Pipkin, who he was recently prepared to abandon at the river. It seems that once there is a practical need for compassion, Bigwig is fully prepared to embrace it. They all reach the beanfield and have a proper rest for the first time. Having left the beanfield, Bigwig's Owsler experience comes to the forefront as they encounter the road. Here he straightforwardly explains the behaviour of hoodoo-dill or cars, as well as the roads they run on. The discovery of a dead Yona allows Bigwig to elaborate on the terrible lights that hoodoo-dill use at night, the only time they can make you go tharn. And then they reach the alien environment of the common, which even Bigwig seems to find unfamiliar. Still, he helps to lead the way, along with Hazel. When Speedwell, Acorn and Hawkbit question Hazel's judgment, and he goes off to have a conversation with Fiver, Bigwig asserts his authority properly for the first time. The entire conversation is not reported, but we hear extracts from Bigwig's verbal assault as he denigrates the rebels' appearance. Probably this is to distract them from their complaints. However, when Hawkbit questions who is Chief Rabbit, Bigwig bites him on the throat hard enough to draw blood. You could argue that Bigwig behaves in this way to further distract them from their fearful situation, or that he knows that they cannot afford any dissent in such a situation. On the other hand, it could be that even Bigwig has his limit and that his behaviour is his reaction to being in such an alien environment as the common. In any case, Hazel is not impressed. And when Bigwig and Silver reach the other side of the common just ahead of the rest, this tension is increased when Blackberry refers to Hazel as Ra. Bigwig reacts indignantly, saying that the day he calls Hazel Ra will be the day he stops fighting. Or, If you are reading a copy of Watership Down without the lost paragraph, Bigwig just says splendid when he sees Hazel has arrived. I've explored this subject extensively in the past, so we'll move on. Having arrived in this new place, Bigwig seems content to dig some scrapes in a bank and relax. He is certainly not thinking long term. He also makes reference to digging proper burrows being doze work. He then takes Silver and Buckthorn to scout out the area, returning to say there is a farm nearby. His Owsler mindset means that he doesn't see this as too much of a cause for concern, as humans will deter a Lil. This turns out to be prophetic. The arrival of Cowslip puts Bigwig on edge at first, and he seems to put Hazel down for letting Cowslip join the group with him. Bigwig makes it his job to ensure Cowslip knows they can defend themselves if needed. This is understandable, as it is him who would have to do the worst of the fighting. Bigwig seems disconcerted by Cowslip's casual demeanour, but in the discussion on whether or not to join Cowslip's warren, he emphasises that they would be safer from a Lil in an established warren. He says that fools attract a Lil, and that means them as long as they are strangers in an unfamiliar place. However, when they arrive at the warren, Bigwig is taken aback at how large and obvious its holes are. He says they are advertising their presence like thrushes singing in the morning. As they all enter the warren together, Bigwig is asked to bring up the rear, and to get away with as many as he can if there is trouble. Bigwig's initial assessment of the area around the warren, in terms of the presence of humans and the atypical nature of the warren itself, turns out to be useful intelligence, though it is not Bigwig himself who starts to put the pieces together. In fact, as soon as he becomes convinced that the rabbits of this warren are no threat, and that there are no Lil around, he fairly quickly begins to feel at home, and seems unworried by the strangeness of these rabbits, particularly when one example of this is copious amounts of flavor left for them by a human. Is he allowing himself to be blinded by immediate comforts? Or is it unreasonable to expect a rabbit such as Bigwig to assess possible risks outside his usual experience? His later adaptability in the strange environment of Ephrafa unfortunately suggests the former. He is no fool, and, you could well argue, should have known better. When he and Hazel come across the site of a snaring, you could also argue that Bigwig should have recognised the signs immediately, but the absence of the actual snare seems to convince him this is nothing to worry about. When they find Fiver above ground, and Hazel tells Bigwig he had been above ground all the previous night, Bigwig shows no tolerance for this behaviour, and practically forces the smaller rabbit below ground. Because that, frankly, is his job as the de facto captain of Owsler, the protection of life. However, Bigwig also seems to grow quietly impatient at the seeming reluctance of Cowslip's rabbits to hear the tale of how they came to join them. For a rabbit such as him, this crosses a line, though he expresses his feelings quietly, saying to himself that they had better enjoy a tale of Elachara instead. And when they seem less than appreciative of Dandelion's rendition of the tale of Elachara and the King's Lettuce, Hazel has to try to persuade him not to speak out. Traditional Lapine culture is obviously very precious to Bigwig. When Silverweed's eerie poem causes Fiver to panic and bolt, Hazel deliberately chooses Bigwig to come and deal with him. It is clear that Bigwig has no time for Silverweed, saying he prefers to keep Silver, as in the rabbit, and he can just be a weed. However, he once again helps Hazel force Fiver back below ground. The next morning Fiver is gone again. And again Bigwig joins Hazel in finding him, which involves a bit of tracking this time. However, as soon as they find him, Bigwig becomes a bit of a liability. What is needed is the gentle touch, but Bigwig has had enough. At first, Bigwig seems to still regard Fiver as being his responsibility, but when Hazel offers to go with him a little way, as he is intent on leaving, Bigwig loses it, saying effectively that Fiver is now outside his protection, as he is now placing Hazel at risk. In his angry rant at Fiver, he reveals an admiration for Hazel that he might not have done yet in ordinary circumstances. And having made Fiver an outcast effectively, Bigwig runs back to the warren, and straight into a snare. As Bigwig starts to lose consciousness, he manages to say a few words about not biting the wire. Instead, they must dig out the peg. Fortunately, Blackberry is able to work out what this means. No sooner have they given up Bigwig for dead than he comes round, and having seemingly heard about the attitude of Cowslip towards his snaring, his first words are of deadly revenge. After Fiver delivers his truth bomb about the warren of the snares, Bigwig wisely acknowledges what he has been going through, using the metaphor of biting through a large peg, and actually asks Fiver for orders. And so, after suggesting Silver deals with the approaching strawberry, Bigwig leaves the dreadful warren that so nearly killed him with the others and the newly accepted Strawberry. On the last part of their journey to Watership Down, we learn that Bigwig had to take a secondary role in defending the group from the rats in the barn, not yet being recovered. His near death has brought the group firmly together, and they now realise how much they rely on one another. And the first time they face an actual attack has cemented Bigwig's role as effective captain of Owsla, with Silver and Buckthorn obeying his orders. But we also learn that what happened to him has made him less overbearing. Bigwig is not involved in the initial climbing of Watership Down, but is glad of the rough holes that are found halfway up the scarp slope. Hazel is aware that Bigwig is among those who will be unwilling to dig new burrows, and he is just breaching with him the subject of recreating the great burrow of the Warren of the Snares, when they are interrupted by an alarm as the sun sets. The terrible sound they hear overrides Bigwig's practical side, as he becomes convinced immediately that it is the Black Rabbit of Inlay. This is made worse when whatever it is calls out his name. Does he feel he cheated death at the snare, and that this was inevitable? In any case, he begins to make his way towards that horrific voice, saying you have to go when it calls you, before Hazel stops him and goes instead. It is actually, of course, a delirious Captain Holly of the Sandalford Owsla, accompanied by Bluebell. After dealing with the practicalities of getting Holly to a burrow, Bigwig tells Hazel he won't forget him going in his place to see what the voice was. His respect for his new Ra has increased a bit more, even though he still won't call him by that title. After an alarm caused by a kestrel, Bigwig says he would like to try standing up to Summer Lil. The spirit of innovation that is developing in the group seems to be rubbing off on him. All the same, he questions Hazel saving a mouse from the kestrel. There are still limits to his ability to innovate, as he shows by saying they will be overrun by mice if they help them. Holly's horrendous account of the destruction of Sandalford reveals that, having survived, Holly could only think about finding Bigwig, having tried to arrest him as he tried to leave. At one point, too upset to continue, he presses his face against Bigwig, who has clearly sat by him deliberately. Holly's sense of honour drives him to find a fellow officer who he wronged so badly, and this was the reason he was deliriously crying out his name when discovered at the foot of Watership Down, having lost 2 of his original party of 4 and been badly injured at the Warren of the Snares. In his fevered mind he had imagined Bigwig would be at the foot of Watership Down waiting for him, and by blind luck that is almost true. Finally, Holly gets to apologise to his fellow Owsla comrade. Later, Silver jokes that cooperation with other creatures will be worth it just to see Bigwig telling bedtime stories to a mole. Clearly, Bigwig is seen as the least likely to work with other creatures, but a story of Elachera doing precisely that, the trial of Elachera, foreshadows Bigwig's attitude changing completely with the arrival of Kihar. Having initially been alarmed by the cries of the injured bird, Bigwig returns to it with Hazel, only to be asked to find it some worms. However, he rapidly improves on this idea by suggesting beetles. It seems he is learning to trust Hazel, even if his orders seem insane. He goes so far as to pick worms out of horse manure for the injured seagull. In fact, he rapidly becomes Kihar's main carer, telling the others how to feed him, and begins to spend a lot of time with the bird, talking about his experiences. It is Bigwig who learns that Kihar was attacked by a cat at the nearby farm, and also learns first of the Pigvata, or the sea as we call it. And it is Bigwig who persuades Kihar to scout out the surrounding countryside for them in the search for other warrens, and therefore for those who might join them. As Kihar is away searching, Bigwig displays anxiety about his returning and loses his temper with the Joker Bluebell at one point. And it is Bigwig who announces Kihar's return. Having made sure Kihar is fed, Bigwig is a bit surly about not being chosen for Holly's mission to the Warren to the south. He is not known for his diplomatic skills, but he says he is looking forward to having some does running about, and even jokes about the terror of making some little bigwigs. Having mischievously taken Pipkin to Nuthanger Farm to scout out the hutch rabbits, Kihar also discovered, Hazel does not hesitate to choose Bigwig for the actual raid that will attempt to liberate them. Having missed out on Holly's mission, Bigwig is enthusiastic about the raid, even making light of the danger from cats, to the extent that Kihar, who was injured by one, criticises his attitude as the others light-heartedly trained to fight cats. They decide to raid after dark. Bigwig is in high spirits, saying they can always bolt and leave the hutch rabbits if there is any danger. His excitement at the prospect of action contrasts strongly with his willingness to abandon the hutch rabbits to their fate if necessary. There is a ruthless side to him that we first saw on the banks of the River Enbourne. Bigwig's excitement is fulfilled very quickly, as he is the first to attack a cat as they arrive at the farm, driving it off with Dandelion and Speedwell's help. But it is only Bigwig who fully fights with the cat, a female calico, getting scratched in the process. Bigwig is effectively in charge, as Hazel is hanging back on Fiver's advice. Having found the hutches, he quickly allocates lookouts and those who will get the hutch open. Having first helped with the hutch, Bigwig takes over as lookout from Dandelion when he becomes too nervous. He has to rely on Blackberry to work out how to get the hutch open when brute force and chewing proves inadequate. Having nearly fallen into the hutch as the door loosens, Bigwig's instructions to the hutch rabbits are harsh and to the point, knowing that they will only get them away by being dominant. All the same, progress is slow, and when the other cat wakes the dog, Bigwig switches to escape mode, only caring about the 2 hutch rabbits who run with them. Bigwig loses his temper when Hazel shows concern for the other 2 hutch rabbits, and he is, you might argue, right to do so. But he obeys Hazel's orders to get Boxwood and Clover away. The cats are still not attacking the other 2 out of nervousness about Bigwig, and they manage to get the doe Haystack away as well, but not before humans arrive in a crudidu, and Hazel gets shot. Bigwig was right. Was getting Hazel shot really worth 1 extra doe? Despite hearing the gunshot, Bigwig goes back to check for Hazel without success. He sees Hazel's blood and probably gets very close to finding him, but this is a dangerous situation and he wisely doesn't hang around. Bigwig capably gets the rest of the raiding party plus 3 hutch rabbits back to Watership Down. Once there, he calls a gathering of the whole warren. This truly is Bigwig at his best. The arrival of Holly and his companions leads to Bigwig calling a second meeting, at which they all learn the terrible truth about Ephrafa. As he does so, it becomes apparent that Blackberry and Fiver are missing, and Bigwig speculates to himself whether they have left in the wake of Hazel's death. He considers sending Keehar to look for them. Bigwig compliments Holly on the way he handled his mission, and shortly afterwards Blackberry brings him the news that Hazel is alive. Despite the approaching darkness, Bigwig descends the down to see Hazel himself, joking that if he meets a stoat it had better watch out. He spends the night with Hazel and Fiver at the ditch where Hazel is recovering. When Hazel returns to the down and outlines his plan to get does out of Ephrafa, Bigwig is one of the first to announce that he is going, as well as Keehar. At this point, he and the seagull are almost a team. When Keehar returns with a bit of rotting fish, Bigwig jokes that he'll send everyone up to Silflay with him. The implication is that they will go anywhere else after that. At some point, which is not included in the narrative, Hazel tells Bigwig what he wants him to do in Ephrafa. And as the large group leaves for Ephrafa, this is clearly playing on his mind. Bigwig is a fighter. However, what is being asked of him requires something else entirely. It requires deception and cunning. There is no doubt that Bigwig is brave enough to infiltrate Ephrafa, but does he have the necessary skills to get a large number of does out from under the noses of the Ephrafa Owsla undetected? At one point, he is overheard being reassured by Hazel that he is the only one who can do it. Hazel also jokingly calls him Fefa Ra, or the King of Cats. However, attempts to keep his spirits up fall flat. This culminates in his demanding to hear the frightening story of Elacher Ra and the Black Rabbit of Inlay. This may be a way for him to mentally prepare himself for what lies ahead of him, but I suspect that Bigwig also feels that the rest of them should also be put through just some of the fear that he is being put through. His attitude is that of someone who is constantly expected to place himself in danger before others. It is the attitude of a soldier during a war, and it is understandable. Later, Bigwig's nerves lead him to his reckless action of luring a fox away from the rest of the group. In doing so, he leads it on to an Ephrafa wide patrol, resulting in the death of Captain Mallow and potentially placing their own mission at risk. But then again, it later turns out that the patrol was tracking them and might have found them if it were not for Bigwig's recklessness. When Hazel tells Bigwig off for what he did, Bigwig is apologetic. He says that he feels like doing something dangerous when he is nervous, which tells us a lot about him. But this also means that members of the Ephrafa Owsla have now seen Bigwig while tracking a large group of rabbits travelling from the north. Having passed too close to Ephrafah, they arrive at the River Test. Here, the discovery of the punt on the riverbank completes the plan, and Hazel tells Bigwig it is time. Without hesitation, Bigwig sets off for Ephrafah. We experience Bigwig's first encounter with General Woundwort from Woundwort's perspective. Bigwig is always referred to by his lapine name of Thlaily while in Ephrafah, despite the fact that all rabbits would actually call him this. He displays a calm confidence in the face of the general, even lashing out at Captain Campion when asked if he could fight him. The fact is that Woundwort knows it is odd for a rabbit to actually want to join Ephrafah, and Bigwig has to gently call him out on this. Thlaily's cover story sticks to the facts as far as possible. His warren was destroyed, he was with other rabbits, but now he is on his own. The subterfuge works, and by Neefrith the following day, Bigwig is a newly marked officer of the Near Hind Mark under Captain Chervil. Bigwig takes up his training as an Ephrafan Owslet officer with enthusiasm. This is only sensible, as he needs to get familiar with his enemy quickly. Holly has told him a lot, but his experience was limited. It becomes obvious to Bigwig that his task is going to be harder than he thought. Among the rank and file, he has two interesting encounters. One with poor Blackavar, who he resolves to get out of Ephrafah as well, and one with the defiant doe Newell Fisher. This gives him his lead to the group of does Holly signposted to him after he encountered Heisensley. Bigwig also gets a chance to speak with Captain Campion, which allows him to sound out where he focuses his patrols, as well as showing false enthusiasm for going on wide patrol. His initial awkward encounter with Heisensley and her friends leads him to use his unpleasant officer's privilege to have her sent for so he can speak to her in private. Their wretchedness has made an impression on him, and Newell Fisher's more defiant attitude is encouraging. Having almost given himself away when he first encountered her, due to Holly's account of meeting her, he manages to persuade Heisensley that he is on her side, and asks her to sound out any does who might be willing to leave. He also learns of Captain Charlock having died on the Iron Road while pursuing Holly during his escape. The rabbits of Watership Down have already caused the deaths of 2 Ephrafan Owslet officers, and this has ironically helped Bigwig to be accepted as a new one. He has also realised how little Owslet members in Ephrafah sometimes know about the warren outside their mark. This can work to his advantage. Heisensley's psychic abilities help persuade her that Thlaily is genuine in what he says, and he feels able to share his plan with her, including Keehar's role. In fact, Bigwig now finds himself with an important ally who can help him improve on the plan. This is a great relief to him. As the first of the 3 Thunder chapters open, Bigwig is told he mentioned Fiver in his sleep. This is an alarming moment which he covers for. He also manages to account for his long conversation with Heisensley before he heads outside to have a covert meeting with Keehar, at which he sets the escape as happening at sunset Silfley that evening, making it clear Keehar must attack the sentries. Captain Chervil sees him near the Seagull and says it will be reported, despite Bigwig's attempts to joke about it. He then finds the does and tells them the plan. Thethuthenang is worried that he will encounter Captain Campion, who is notorious as the warren's best tracker, but Bigwig reassures her he can handle him. At sunset, Bigwig prepares to begin the escape. Keehar arrives. Blackabar is brought up to be seen by the mark as usual. And then, just as he is ready to begin, General Woundwort interrupts him. Bigwig suppresses his instinct to attack Woundwort on the spot. Instead, he calmly accounts for Grandsell having seen him lead the fox onto the wide patrol before he joined Ephrafah, as well as any knowledge he may have of the large group of rabbits they were tracking. Woundwort also asks him about the white bird, which Bigwig explains by saying he was showing off. Woundwort ends by asking Thlaily to keep an eye on the rebellious does. Frustrated, Bigwig allows his temper to get the better of him once Woundwort is gone. The plan is in tatters. Keehar has gone, and Woundwort intends to take him out on wide patrol a couple of days later in an attempt to track Bigwig's companions. Bigwig is understandably tense. It feels as if a net is closing in on him. Woundwort simply knows too much. How long before he starts to put the pieces together? Heisensley asks if just her and Thethuthenang could get away with him, but Bigwig realises this desperate plan has too many risks and would amount to a failure. The thunder is building, and this adds to the sense of oppression. Bigwig plans to try again the following evening. He has no choice now, as his wide patrol will happen the following day. Events unfold rapidly now. Newell Fisher makes an ill-advised comment to Chervil due to her now knowing about the plan. Bigwig uses the pretence of using a spoken charm in front of Chervil to tell Keehar to return that evening. Keehar had been trying to get news to the other Watership Down rabbits, but this inadequate information is all Bigwig can manage, having been banned from going near him. Finally, he is able to have a quick word with Blackavar to warn him of the escape plan. In doing this, he angers Bartzia, a member of the notorious Auslaffer, or Council Police. Bigwig is awoken to the news from Heisenclay that Nelfilter has been arrested. He tells her to gather the escapees immediately. Chervil tells him that Silflay is cancelled before he has to go to the council borough. Having established that Avons, the other deputy, has not been told, Bigwig crosses the Rubicon by saying Silflay is still on and ensuring Blackavar is brought up. This is high risk, as he cannot be certain who Chervil has already spoken to. Bigwig then gets between Blackavar and his guard Bartzia and shouts at Blackavar to attack the other, before viciously attacking Bartzia, breaking his leg. This is a slow death sentence for a wild rabbit, but in the process, Bigwig's shoulder is injured. Shouting at Avons that Chervil wants him, Bigwig commences the escape, with no idea if his comrades from Watership Down are ready for him. The Afrafan pursuit is not very far behind, and as they stop under the bridge under the Iron Road, Bigwig begins to think he might have made a mistake. He orders the escapees to carry on towards the river before they are intercepted by Campion, and then Woundwort arrives in force. It seems they have failed. Just as Bigwig is cursing Woundwort as a preliminary to a fight to the death, the thunder breaks, and then, as if a product of the storm, Keehar attacks the Afrafans. And then Silver is next to Bigwig. The Watership Down rabbits were prepared. The escape is back on. With the help of the others, Bigwig gets everyone to the boat. Keehar makes it clear that the Afrafans are still tracking them under cover, but the does will only obey their commanding officer, Thlaeli, so he has to tell most of them to get on the punt in person. Dandelion is now trapped on the bank as Woundwort advances on the boat menacingly, saying the bird isn't there now. With a final bluff, Bigwig shouts that he sees Keehar, giving Dandelion a moment to make a run for it. The rope that Hazel has chewed parts, and as they float away, Bigwig's last view of Woundwort reminds him of the kestrel that missed the mouse. Unsurprisingly, Bigwig plays little part in events as they float down the River Test. He is exhausted and tells Hazel some of what happened at Efrafa. When the punt gets stuck on the bridge, Bigwig is the last to swim through to the bank with Fiver and Silver. After resting, and the death of one of the does after being injured on the river, Hazel and Bigwig say farewell to Keehar. His journey back to Watership Down is only punctuated by the death of another doe in the jaws of a fox, after he argues with Blackavar as to whether or not this is fox country. Blackavar proves to be a rabbit who is worth listening to, but Bigwig is amazed at the casual way Blackavar deals with this. Heisenstein explains it was just the way in Afrafa. If your advice was ignored, you forgot about it. And, after running into Campion again, they arrive back on Watership Down. But Bigwig's trials are not over yet. He is initially dismissive of the mouse's information that there are new rabbits nearby, but the awful reality soon sets in. Bigwig and Hazel are just beginning to plan for the future when the great patrol from Efrafa is confirmed as being nearby. Instantly he is back in warrior mode, swearing to take one or two Efrafans with him if he is to die. Hazel leaves Bigwig in charge of blocking the holes while he goes to speak with Woundwort. Once the nighttime siege begins and the Afrafans begin digging down into the honeycomb, Bigwig suggests getting the rabbits into the sleeping burrows at one end and blocking them by expanding the burrows. Despite Bigwig's seeming enthusiasm for the coming fight, all seems lost. And then, after Fiver has a bizarre episode during which he barks like a dog, Hazel has an idea. He tells Bigwig to fetch Dandelion and Blackberry, and says to block the run they use as soon as they are gone. He doesn't need to tell Bigwig the details. In fact, it might be better if he doesn't know. What he has planned must be a complete surprise, which a nearly dead Bigwig might inadvertently give away. From behind the last-ditch defences, Bigwig hears the roof of the honeycomb give way. Earlier he had realised that his only chance against Woundwort was to injure him badly right at the start. A comment from Holly gives Bigwig the idea of being buried in the floor of the run. He tells them they must make noise to ensure Woundwort breaks through in this specific run. Sadly leaving the unconscious Fiver in the honeycomb, they get to work. Bigwig tries to be kind to Pipkin about Fiver, but insists he doesn't stay with him. Bigwig's plan works. As soon as Woundwort breaks through the blocked run, he flies at him from underneath and inflicts a bad wound on one of his front legs. And so Woundwort is forced to fight Bigwig in a narrow space and already hurt. Bigwig gets away by forcing Woundwort onto his back on the loose earth behind. He then tries to taunt Woundwort into a brash attack so he can injure him again, but he is too clever for that. Realising how badly Woundwort's leg is injured, Bigwig strikes at it again, but ends up under Woundwort with his ear badly bitten. But as Woundwort tries rising up to strike, his leg gives way. Bigwig springs back, holds his position, and realises he can see very faint daylight behind Woundwort. From behind him, Holly urges Bigwig to let him take his place, but Bigwig rejects this. Alive or dead, he is blocking this run and cannot risk it. He hears Bluebell behind him telling the does a story. This sums up all that he is defending. Woundwort tries pointing out that he can just send in one rabbit after another to finish the job, which just provokes the best insult in the entire book from Bigwig. Silthle chraka u emblia ra. An excellent insult for any tyrant that deserves a t-shirt all of its own. Without warning, Woundwort attacks again, just using his weight. They snap and bite at each other. Woundwort is pushing Bigwig back into the burrow he is defending. Bigwig loosens his hold on Woundwort's shoulder and bears his weight down. Woundwort has his teeth clamped on Bigwig's back, but gradually his hold loosens. One of Bigwig's earlier blows has filled his nose with blood, and he can no longer maintain a hold without suffocating. Bigwig becomes delirious and lies still. He hears Fiver talking about the wire. Squealing, he wakes up. Woundwort is gone. Woundwort sends Vervain in to continue the fight. We do not hear what happens, but he soon gives up, saying he has some grit in his eye. And then they see that, having been left, Thlaley has made up all his lost ground in the run. Woundwort tries pointing out that they can dig their way in from another run, and they will find more ways in. Without realising the effects his words will have, Bigwig informs him that his chief has ordered him to defend this run. It does not even occur to the likes of Woundwort or Vervain that Bigwig's chief rabbit might be a smaller, weaker rabbit than him. Woundwort leaves to gather his troops. Vervain is terrified by Fiver and also leaves. Bigwig is alone. His fight is over. I have heard that in an early draft of Watership Down, Bigwig was to have died from his injuries, but that Richard Adams' daughters begged him not to do this. I cannot find the source in the time available to me, but I'm sure someone will let me know. In any case, in the published version, he survives. He knows nothing of the dog arriving on the down, but just lays where he fell, being tended to by the others. It is only when Hazel arrives back from his adventures in Ahrududu that Bigwig speaks, jokingly impersonating Kihar, as he asks if Woundwort is finished. He also addresses Hazel, for the first time, as Hazel Ra. Something that in the lost paragraph he said he would never do until the day he stopped fighting. It seems that day has come, and very well deserved it is too. In the wake of the battle, Bigwig founds a very free and easy Owsla on Watership Down. We last encounter him as, now lop-eared and covered in scratches, he tries to train Clover's kittens. They in turn gently make fun of this veteran and try to distract him into telling them stories of his adventures. A fitting end for an old warrior. So that is Bigwig, the best warrior in the novel Watership Down. Physically brave, a skilled fighter, and ultimately, it turns out, adaptable and cunning when the need arises. The original portrayal of his character was very much of its time, one in which many veterans of the largest war in human history were still alive, including, of course, Richard Adams. The combination of his capacity for extreme violence, alongside a highly developed sense of honour, but also a capacity for pragmatic ruthlessness, perhaps makes him a difficult character to understand in any culture that has not experienced war in its recent history. And in the next episode, we will see how his portrayal has changed over half a century. Next time, We look at the portrayal of Bigwig from the 1978 film to the 2018 Netflix miniseries.